We want to turn our attention now, well, to a city where this has been an issue, but a different issue there, the city of Chicago, which may be on the verge of becoming the largest city in the United States to declare that it is in favor of a ceasefire. The mayor came out yesterday. There is a bill in front of the alders there in Chicago. There was a delayed vote, but nonetheless, to get into all of this, we are very, very honored to be joined for this conversation by Rossana Rodriguez-Sanchez, who is an alderwoman for the 33rd Ward of Chicago and also the chair of the Committee on Health and Human Relations. Alderwoman, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here.
Well, we are really, really happy to have you here. And you, I believe, are the original sponsor of the bill to call for a ceasefire. Before we get into some of what's happening with that, what motivated you to put this in? Why is it important for the city of Chicago to get on record that it supports a ceasefire in Gaza?
From a personal standpoint, I am from Puerto Rico. I am from a colonized nation, and our struggle has always been linked to the Palestinian struggle. From the perspective of being an elected official here in Chicago, I represent an incredibly diverse community. There's so many Palestinians in my community and in Chicagoland. Like, we have the biggest population of Palestinians in the whole country.
So this was supposed to be voted on this week, right? But there was a delay in the vote due to I think 28 alderpersons signing this letter that requesting that there be a delay in this vote on a ceasefire from the city of Chicago over the sensitivity of International Holocaust Remembrance Day on Saturday, which of course seems bizarre because if you learn anything from the Holocaust, it's that we should be against atrocities, right? So can you talk a bit about what happened in that fight at City Hall yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about yesterday, but this is a fight that has been going on for a little bit longer than that. We introduced this resolution. I introduced the resolution in November, but it was sent to the Committee on Rules by one of my colleagues, and that means that it would be incredibly hard to get it out of there. So we ended up introducing a new resolution in December. I have been trying to work with colleagues to explain the urgency of this matter. My colleague sent that letter trying to delay the vote. Although I spoke about the fact that I disagreed with the premise of that statement, that Holocaust Remembrance Day should actually move us to talk about the need to make sure that it never happens again to anybody, to anyone, nowhere, ever. I did understand the need for strategy at this point, and I know that I could bring more people on board if I delayed the vote. So although it was incredibly painful to sit through the remarks that were, some of my colleagues would repeatedly use the words "never again" in the chambers where there were so many Palestinians sitting in the audience. I did understand that strategically it was the option to make sure that we can pass a ceasefire resolution ultimately.
You know, I'm wondering if you're feeling encouraged by the level of support for a ceasefire in Chicago. I mean, I'm in New York, but at least what I can see in the outside, I mean, you got the mayor. I know there was the Rainbow Push Summit, but I mean, for anyone who's following the protests, Chicago has been one of the centers in the United States of protest and solidarity with Palestine. So, despite the sort of mechanics of the vote, are you feeling encouraged by seeing the reaction among Chicagoans to what's happening here?
Oh, for sure. And it has been like this from the very beginning. Movement here has been incredibly strong, and it just keeps growing. And not the cold, not the frigid temperatures, the snow, nothing have been able to stop people from going in the streets. It has always been beautiful to see so many of our Jewish siblings come out and do civil disobedience and take over the streets as well. So of course, that has created a lot of pressure. Chicago is a progressive city. I think that most people are in favor of a ceasefire right now, and we need to listen to people.
You mentioned that this has been a very long fight, and you did help lead this resolution towards a ceasefire. So I imagine that has provoked a great deal of backlash for you. I mean, we know in American politics, this is a very, I wouldn't say it's necessarily as controversial among constituencies, but when it comes to actual politics, there's a lot of pressure groups that go into action whenever anybody tries to push back against the government of Israel. So, what has been the backlash that you've received? And when you talk about this being a long fight, what has that fight looked like?
Well, the beginning of this fight looked like a resolution that was introduced by one of my colleagues expressing unconditional support for Israel. Um, we had to have a hearing about that resolution. It was a special council meeting, and I was the no vote on record. After I took that no vote, I started receiving death threats, rape threats. It it became a very violent sort of environment, um, and we just what I did was that I continued to move and organize with my colleagues and with the organizations that are on the ground to make sure that I had the support that I needed, and that's the way that it has happened so far.
You mentioned this at the outset, but I just wanted to hit it again because I think it's a really important element of this that, as a Puerto Rican, you felt a special affinity here, not only to bring this, but in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And I was hoping you could just talk about that a little more because I feel in the mainstream American discourse, many people are taught and don't even think of Puerto Rico as a colonized territory.
Yeah, well, I come from a pro-independence household. I saw so many people around me be like criminalized for being pro-independence. Um, my father had a COINTELPRO file. So I feel like Puerto Ricans have experienced firsthand historically so many of the same things that happened to colonized nations. There was a moment in Puerto Rico where people were not allowed to wave the Puerto Rican flag, and anybody who had a Puerto Rican flag risked going to prison for over a decade. Any show of national pride, any show of identity, right, was punished. Um, our island town of Vieques was bombed by the U.S. Navy for 60 years. So there are so many similarities in our access to land and resources, in the ways in which we get to make decisions or not make any decisions about our economy, about our agriculture. Um, I think that our struggles are deeply connected, and I feel deeply the struggle and the pain of Palestinians at this moment, and I think that it is our duty to come out and fight for peace, and against the occupation.
hmm Well, we will continue to follow this story. I'm sorry, Ron, you want to jump in?
Well, I just wanted to ask one more thing,
Please.
because I think it's really interesting that a city is going to vote on this measure. I wasn't even aware. I guess like a city could, but why not? So I guess my question is like, what's the significance of that? Let's say this passes, right? What does that mean going forward? What's the significance of Chicago and other cities passing a resolution calling for a ceasefire?
I think the more we talk about it and the more there is legitimacy, right, from government bodies that represent people, saying that this is wrong, that we need a ceasefire, that the way that Israel is acting towards Palestine is incredibly cruel. Um, it makes a difference in the political landscape. It makes a difference in the public opinion. And we need to be able to challenge the moments in which our government is acting in ways that go against the values of our communities. So it is very important for Chicago to take a stance right now, particularly being that Chicagoland has the biggest Palestinian population in the US.
hmm hmm Well, we will continue to follow this. It's a very, very important story. Rossana Rodriguez-Sanchez, representing the 33rd Ward of Chicago, thank you so much for some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you for having me.